I'm pleased to be joined now by Jim Nagy, the executive director of the Reese Senior Bowl and an 18-year NFL scout. Jim, thanks so much for joining the Reid Option podcast.
Yeah, Jordan, pretty cool to be on. This is an awesome new project you got going.
Absolutely. And we were talking a little bit pre-show of just how crazy this COVID-19 situation is and the pandemic that's going on. So, of course, the first thing I have to ask you is, how are you and the family? How are you guys, wavering the situations that are going on right now in the world?
Yeah, thanks for asking that, Jordan. Yeah, the family's good. Our staff here in the office is good. We've had some people impacted, in and around our game. We have 400 committee members down here, and we've got, obviously our governing board that controls our game. So we have had some people affected in that group, which has been scary at times, but they made it through. So that's good. So hope everyone is good on the Draft Network side as well.
Absolutely. Everybody's good. The content team has been great. And something that we've done new this year is we've actually split up into an actual scouting department, how NFL teams are run. So we've done a good job of getting through most of the country for the most part. But on the flip side, I want to flip it back to you a little bit. And I know you guys are run like your own scouting department in a sense. So with some of these guys not being able to play this year and not really getting to play their senior year, just how are you guys able to evaluate those guys moving forward?
Yeah, I've said this before. I don't know if silver lining is the right word, but, I guess the only positive for us from a scouting standpoint that's come out of the COVID was, we had to cancel a lot of what we like to do down here in Mobile locally. 7-on-7 high school stuff. We've got a youth play 60 flag league. We had a great Hall of Fame class this year. We had to cancel our Hall of Fame event. Had a great Hall of Fame class. So, but what that's been able to do is just allow us to focus on watching this year's class. So our 3 in-house scouts have been working on this group since really a couple weeks after last year's Senior Bowl game. And then I had to, I kind of had to play catch up when we got to May, but right now we've got over 500 names on the board, like emergency list and up. We've probably evaluated over 900 players for this year's draft cycle. So we feel like we're in a better spot, than we've been at least my 2 years here, way further ahead. So if we had to pick a roster right now, I feel confident that we could do that. But yeah, I mean, you hate it for the Pac-12 and Big Ten guys because there's always those guys that, the risers in the fall, and there's no way to account for those guys now. You got to be able to work with what you have to work with, and all we have is 19 and 18 tape. So in some cases, we've had to go back to 18. Guys that were injured and missed a lot of time last year, so we've done that as well. So we're doing the best we can.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that just because you put out a tweet yesterday saying that you were on a huge conference call with all 32 NFL teams yesterday, and I'm sure there were a lot of ideas shared yesterday, and obviously you can't reveal too much just because that's secret information for you guys, but just talk about some of the possible adjustments that we might see in January or from the Senior Bowl this year.
Yeah, I think, again, haven't had an official call with the guys of the league office yet. They're really – again, they've got a big job on their hands trying to get their season launched, and I understand that. So, but really, we have to have that call first and see what the draft calendar is going to look like. I just wanted to let those guys, at the league level, know that we're willing to do what we need to do to help them. Again, that a big function of what we do. This game is for those guys. I mean, that's why we put on this game, is to help them. I feel like we work, for the 32 teams, and that's why we include them, in the bottom end of the roster construction as well. Like these rosters aren't for us. We want to bring the players they want to see. So, so we'll adjust. If they move the draft calendar back, like say they move it all the way back to that June 2nd date that's allowed in the CBA, that basically would buy everyone. If we push back a month and the combine pushed back a month, that would buy us all a little time. I think there's optimism out there. There's hope that there's a vaccine by later in the fall. And if we push back, 4 or 5 weeks, maybe that gives more time for widespread distribution of a vaccine. Who knows? But I just, we're willing to do that. Obviously, I think we could extend our game. I think we could make it a 2-week event. I do think just talking to agents, we're talking to those guys on a daily basis. The phones, I'm looking at my phone right now. It's been crazy the last week. I mean, it seems like Senior Bowl time with agents calling. players. They're trying to get a feel for what this thing's going to look like as well. So again, I'm trying to be mindful of, we try to serve those guys, we try to serve the players, we try to serve the teams. And if I'm a guy that's a Big Ten player, a Pac-12 player, and, theoretically I haven't put pads on in 12 months, like I'm sensitive to that. I get it. Like they want to come down here and put their best foot forward. So if we extended to 2 weeks, we could have some sort of acclimation period for those guys, so maybe there's the first 3 or 4 days are conditioning days and they're just doing drill work, a lot similar to like combine stuff. A lot of the combine position drills that you see in Indy, maybe we'll do some of that the first 3 or 4 days, just get their bodies used to doing football stuff, and then go uppers for a couple of days. Maybe we usually do 1 day in uppers, maybe we do 3 days in uppers and then 4 days in pads. So that way, so they can get acclimated, they can shake off rust. And then it gives the teams, another week of evaluation. And and extending out the week, I think one of the challenges for the NFL is they're not on campus right now. They're not going to be able to, in most cases, it doesn't sound like they're going to be able to go to games in the fall. So the schools have been great with us. They've allowed us to be on all these Zoom calls with the 32 teams. And, I have been surprised. Some schools have been pretty forthcoming on those. Others, it's pretty vanilla. So I think from just an information gathering standpoint, the 32 clubs are going to be way far behind in terms of where they're usually at coming into the pre-draft process. So they're going to have a lot of answers that they need, questions they need to have answered. So I think another week in it, with and around these players will help them get familiar with them. And again, I just was on the phone with one of the opt-out guys the other day that has a chance to play in our game. And I said to him, I said, these GMs are human beings, like they want to be familiar with guys they draft. And so, if you came here and you spent 2 weeks around these guys, that's a huge benefit, especially in a weird year like this. I mean, that's one of the reasons I took this job. I'm a big believer in the value of the Senior Bowl. The combine serves its function, but man, this is football. And this is what I think smart teams, really rely on this week because it is football. But I do think even more than in a normal year, our game takes on more importance because of that, that these guys are so far behind and getting to know these guys. You know this, Jordan. I think the easier part is watching the tape and evaluating the tape. The harder part is getting to know the person. So if we extend it out another week, I think it would benefit all parties involved.
Absolutely. And I want to piggyback a little bit off that last key point that you made with one of the opt-outs. Now, I know an idea that you floated out, I don't know whether it was on Twitter or somewhere that I was listening to you, is that the possibility that underclassmen of playing in the game. And I know that's something that's not really allowed in the league right now, but just talk about the possibility of underclassmen playing in the game and then some of the hoops and dynamics that you guys would have to go through and why that could benefit the Senior Bowl.
Yeah. So, it was really good progress. Like 6 or 7 years ago now, I want to say, the league opened up our game to juniors that graduate in December. And when I took this job, that was a huge focus. When I took this job was really take advantage of that. Right. I think that before we got here a couple of years ago, their juniors they had in the game was 4 in 1 year. We've had 23 over the last 2 years. And those juniors really beefed up our roster. So identifying those guys and being out ahead of it, whether it's through the schools or through agents, trying to figure out which of these juniors are going to get their diplomas in December has been huge for us. I don't think in a normal year you would ever, there's a lot of stuff on Twitter. People are like, well, why don't you have a Junior Bowl? I don't think the league will ever get to a point where they're allowed underclassmen to come out because it's an incentive to leave. I don't think, the NFL has any interest in upsetting their relationships with colleges. That's a huge thing. And we have to be mindful of that this year, in terms of when our invites go out, if they're trying to play a spring league. So there's a lot of layers there. But yeah, you don't want an all-star invite to incentivize a kid, to leave early. And so I don't think it will ever open up to all juniors. I think having the December grad thing is huge. And we did a lot of work over the summer trying to identify those guys. Now the key is, if they leave campus and they decide to, start training for the draft and they're focused on the draft, hopefully they're taking those classes online or something, and they follow through and get that diploma, because I'm staring at the board right now, and there's a lot of good juniors that could be coming to Mobile this year.
Absolutely. So I want to go back a little bit, and I want to shine the light a little bit on you. So I want you to talk about your journey in your career as a scout, and then how you got into scouting specifically.
I hate talking about myself. Yeah, you know, just me personally, the only benefit I had was growing up. I knew I wanted to do this from the time I was like 6 or 7 years old. I really did. And that's why, you know, just watching the draft, growing up as a kid, something about the team building part of it. My dad was a coach. I never really got bit by the coaching bug. Just watching the draft, even as a little guy, it just fascinated me, just the whole team building part. And that's why I feel like everyone in the industry owes Mel Kiper, you know, a gratitude, man. He built this thing. He built what the draft is and the draft process is. So people ask how I get into it. That's the only advantage I had, was I knew what I wanted to do from the time I was little. And then I just had a singular focus moving forward. So, you know, had an opportunity out of college to go to Green Bay. Back then, there weren't any opportunities in scouting to like entry-level jobs to get your foot in. The only way to get your foot in the door was through PR. So I knew that. So had a great opportunity there. Was very lucky to get my foot in the door in Green Bay in '96. Just happened to be the Super Bowl year, which was a really cool year to be around the team. Knew I wanted to scout, but, you know, you're there in the building for a reason. So, you know, busted my butt on the PR side. And then when I did have a free second, I'd go kind of harass those guys in the scouting department and ask, you know, kind of ask those guys to let me watch tape with them. And that was a cool staff. There was 5 future GMs on that staff besides Ron Wolf. And, you know, 2 of the pro guys, and there were young guys at the time, John Schneider and Reggie McKenzie, shared an office. So that's, those are my guys. They'd let me go in there and watch with them. So, yeah. And then it just kind of led from there. And then my first job as an area scout was when John Schneider got the opportunity to hire a staff in Washington, when Marty Schottenheimer was the coach in '01. So John hired me to scout the West Coast for him. And then, you know, just like anything, you know, you get your foot in the door, you just work hard, and, you know, hard work can make up for a lot. You know, when you're a young scout, you haven't seen a lot of players. So the evaluation part, I look back on some of those reports and kind of cringe a little bit sometimes when I read those reports those first couple of years. But if you're working hard as a young scout, especially on the background part, that's critical. Man, you can buy yourself time. You can miss on some evaluations if you're nailing the character part right. So again, that was always my biggest fear, especially as a young scout, trying to get my feet under myself, was I was the only one going through the schools, you know, 2, 3, 4 times in the fall. Like nobody else was going to do that. A lot of guys in that building that could throw the tape on and watch the tape, but nobody was going to be, you know, go through Columbus or Ann Arbor or South Bend 3 or 4 times in the fall. That was on me. So my biggest fear was, you know, we draft a player and we get him there, and then I go back, you know, go to training camp. Nobody knows that player yet. You know, they're trying to figure out the rookies, you know, in training camp and everything. And they don't really know them as people going through a full season. What's this guy going to be like this season? My fear was I go back out to the facility for December draft meetings, and one of the coaches or the head coach comes up and like, Jim, this guy's nothing like you said he was going to be. That was always my biggest, that kind of drove me. Like I was always fearful of that moment. And thank God it never happened. So, yeah, man. So that was kind of my journey. You know, you get in, you work hard, and then you know, I went from, you know, that 1 year in Washington kind of blew up on all of us. We went 8-8. I felt personally Marty Schottenheimer should have won Coach of the Year that year, going 8-8 with a roster that we had. You know, John completely tore that thing down and tried to build it back up in 1 year, and did a great job. He had a lot of great pieces, but for whatever reason, Marty got let go and John got let go. So then I ended up in New England the next year, and had a good run in New England, and then went to Kansas City, and was there 4 years, and then went to Seattle for 5. So, and then this job presented itself, and it was just too good of an opportunity for me to pass up. You know, we've been living in Mobile, Alabama for 12 years. It's my wife's hometown. You know, this job, the scouting job, is one thing when you're a single guy with no kids. It takes on a whole different dynamic when you're married and you got kids. And my kids were growing up, and you're on the road 200 nights a year, and you're missing a lot. So this job afforded me to still do what I love to do, which is evaluate players and and actually do more than I was doing as a scout, but still be there for all my kids, all my stuff.
Absolutely. That's a great story. All right, so piggybacking off of that, I just want to ask you about your best scouting memory now that you've been an 18-year NFL scout. So I'm sure you have a funny story or, some favorite players that you've ever evaluated during your time.
Yeah. Funny stories. I got asked that on a podcast a couple years ago, and I couldn't come up with it off the top of my head. So I was thinking of one. Just like being a first-year scout with the Redskins in I think it was 2000. I was 26 years old, I want to say. And they didn't give us company credit cards to kind of bankroll ourselves when we were on the road. So I had nothing in the bank account, man. I was rubbing nickels together. But I remember being in Seattle and been out like a week or two, hadn't got the expense check back. Wanted to go up in the Space Needle. I was staying nearby the Space Needle. I walked over to the Space Needle. Didn't know how much it cost to get in. I forget what it was. But I went to the ATM and checked my balance, and it was so low, like I didn't even feel good about taking money out to go in the Space Needle. So that was kind of sad, kind of a sad time. But a lot of good memories, man. A lot of good memories, a lot of great players. The best memories are just seeing greatness. I know that's why most guys do this. It's, identifying greatness early is fun. So like a Troy Polamalu is one of my favorite players I've ever done. In terms of like, I always say I always tell players, the biggest compliment I could give you is that you're fun to watch on tape. And Troy was so much fun to watch. He was so instinctive, so aggressive, just, flew around. You saw it early. The player he became in the NFL, I mean, that's what he was at USC. I mean, he did everything. And, funny story from scouting him, the day that I show up on campus, he's easy to see on tape. He's got the hair going, flowing out of the back of the helmet. And the day I was there, they were selling the Polamalu wigs, I think, at the campus bookstore. I go out to practice, and all the players had it on. So it was pretty funny that day. They all practiced in those wigs. But, yeah, man, those are the best memories. It's just like seeing great players early on and then follow them through their pro careers. And the other best memories are just, going to Super Bowls with a group of guys that you've, helped build a team with and assemble a roster with, and kind of realizing that goal. And again, that's the other reason why most people get into scouting. That's why I did. You just want to stay a part of it. You want to stay connected. You want to feel, you're a part of something bigger than yourself, and being part of it, being part of a team in a collection being down on the field after the Seahawks Broncos Super Bowl at the confetti coming down. I had my son on my shoulders. I think he was like 9 years old at the time. I still got a picture in my office with him on my shoulders at that. So like those are the greatest memories. But just being part of a group, being around guys, so many friendships, and that's the thing I miss sometimes with this role is just being in those draft meetings again and some of the fun times there.
And last question, then I'll let you run. So you've seen how the draft game has really changed in the sense you've been in it for well over 20 years now. And I wouldn't call you a rookie to social media anymore. I think you got a little bit of experience in you now. But just seeing how the draft process has changed, I think social media is a big part of that. But now on social media, you see a lot of these young scouts or people that are trying to break into the industry. But just thinking about those guys, just talk about some advice that you have for them that you've maybe experienced in your career, and then some other things maybe that you can share that they may experience in the future.
Yeah, I guess it just depends on what the end goal is, right, Jordan? Whether it's to continue to be, in the media world, kind of live in that space, or if your goal is to, get with a team. So that's it. So that kind of is different, whatever the goal might be. But again, whatever it is, just work hard at it. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Obviously, try to keep learning. I mean, that's the biggest thing. You can always learn football. You can always get better at it. I mean, there's always, no matter what staff I was on, I mean, there was always someone that knew more about a certain position than I did, whether they, played it at a high level or coached it at a high level. So, constantly seek knowledge, and humble yourself to do that. Again, I've learned a lot of hard lessons, and that's been the fun part about having the job here at the Senior Bowl and having some young scouts, here in the building, is I can pass that down now. And hopefully those guys don't have to learn the hard mistakes that I learned the hard way. But just work hard and be passionate. And that's what, you know, you guys at the Draft Network, it's so cool to see. I mean, there's so many people on social media that are passionate about this, man. And it keeps me going because, you know, that's the hardest part right now. I think trying to break into scouting. I talked about my experience back in the 90s. You know, there weren't as many people. It was probably easier to break in because the scouting profession wasn't known as well. It was harder in a lot of degrees because, like I said, there weren't scouting internships, there weren't entry level, there weren't scouting assistant positions. So there wasn't any of that. College recruiting wasn't nearly as big back then. So you didn't have these college recruiting staffs that you get on and get experience with. So so in some ways it's harder, in some ways it's easier, but you know, just keep working hard at it. Again, there's so many guys on Twitter that you know, really energize me because they get on there on a daily basis and they're working hard at it. And you guys at the Draft Network are a great example of that.
Absolutely. That's great words of advice. I really thank you for sharing that. But Jim, thanks so much for joining me. It was a pleasure. It's always great talking to you and picking your brain just because I think you're like an encyclopedia of wealth of the scouting industry. So thank you so much for joining the Reid Option podcast today.
Yeah, Jordan, keep up the great work, man. It's you're doing a great job.
I appreciate it. Thanks, Jim.
Be safe.